Hi there, motorhome owners. Today on your 2004 Ford F-53 chassis motorhome, we're going to be taking a look at and showing you how to install Roadmaster's Exact Center steering stabilizer. We'll be using the custom bracket kit as well for our Class A motorhome here. All right, so before we install the steering stabilizer and really feel the difference that we've got an older motorhome here. This one is getting kind of redone by the customer, so he's already kind of looked over the suspension, made sure things are good. He's had a lot of that service. Now he's working on the interior, but he wants it to be the best driving experience possible. We're gonna hit our test course here with it just stock, and then we'll install our steering stabilizer and hit the course again and see the difference. So we're just going to go over our bumps course first. This is going to be our uneven bumps, and this is going to simulate like hitting a pothole. One wheel hits, and you'll see here in the wheel when I hit the bump where it jerked the wheel right there. And that's what our steering stabilizer is mainly going to combat, is this movement here in the wheel. Like normally when you're driving, you hit those bumps, you got to be the one that's, you know, in control, ready to counteract for any of that. The steering stabilizer is going to help to dampen some of that and minimize, as well as help return it to center, so you're not the only one doing it. So we're going to head down, and we're also going to do our slalom section here. Steering stabilizers really don't affect that too much, but I do just want to see how the wheel feels when getting into a turn, if it seems to make it a little bit more difficult to steer, like it takes a little bit more effort after having the stabilizer on, or if it feels just natural, like it's kind of like it's not there for when just kind of normal driving when not hitting any bumps. So we're coming up to that slalom section here, and get it right up here, and we'll see how it feels here. And it's pretty smooth on the steering right now, so we'll kind of see how this compares once we get that new stabilizer on there. Now that we've kind of felt that, we're just going to get it back over and start getting it installed. So we got our steering stabilizer installed, and on our Class A motorhome here, we were able to install the entire thing just by rolling underneath without having to jack it up or anything. So it's kind of nice that you can do this right in your driveway without having to do anything. So we're going to get back right on the test course just like we did before. We'll do our uneven bumps, our even bumps, and then our slalom section. So let's see how our uneven bumps hit it here. And let's see. Oh wow, you can definitely feel that there's a difference there. It does still move on you, but the amount that it moves is very manageable and minimized compared to what it was before. And now we're kind of hitting it just pretty straight on. We're getting almost no movement out of it at all. So we're going to go ahead now, we're hitting into the even bump section. And again, if you're hitting this directly straight on, where both wheels hit it exactly the same time, you shouldn't feel anything. But if you're hitting it at a slight difference from one side to the other, you can still get that movement there. And as I turn the wheel here, normally before you would turn the wheel back to center, but let's see how quickly the stabilizer is going to push it back as we're making our turn. So I'm just going to kind of let go here. And yeah, I mean, it really quickly turns it back, so you can kind of just loosen up your grip and let it do a lot of the work there without having to use your arm to turn it around. So that does feel really nice. All right, we're in our slalom section now. And I really don't feel like there's any increased effort when turning the wheel, but you can definitely feel the stabilizer returning it back to center. I mean, it does most of the work for you there. You almost just can kind of let go, and it whips it right back for you. So it does a lot of the work there for you. I don't really feel much difference in the amount of effort that I have to put into turning the wheel, but it does sound like maybe the power steering pump is a little bit louder than it was before. And this is a bit older of a motorhome, so it probably was making some noise to begin with anyway, but it does sound like it's putting a little bit more stress on it when you're going to turn it. So this is what our steering stabilizer looks like when it's installed. We have put it on a Class A motorhome, and there are a couple variants on the stabilizer. They all look and perform the same, but they do have different capacities. For a bigger motorhome like this, you're going to need more power than you would on a smaller vehicle. But we do offer these for your Class A motorhomes, your Class C motorhomes, as well as some trucks and Jeeps as well. So you can see if you've got one available for yours in the appropriate size, and then you would also want to make sure you get the appropriate fit kit for your model. Because while all the stabilizers basically look fairly similar to one another, the hardware where you'll attach it to your vehicle is going to vary. In most cases, it's going to attach to either the axle or the frame on one side, and then the other side is going to attach to your steering mechanism. We've got it attached to the drag link that goes across on this one here. And the stabilizer's main purpose is to kind of keep the steering wheel in its resting position, which is where our steering wheel is perfectly straight with our wheels straight. So that way, if we hit kind of like any kind of pothole or uneven pavement, that makes your wheel jerk to the left or to the right. This is going to minimize how much that's going to jerk to the left or the right. So you're not going to have to do all the work keeping your motorhome going straight down the road when you hit any of those obstructions. The Exact Center is going to be an upgrade over the previous Roadmaster model, which was the reflex stabilizer. The old one had a dampener and a spring on it, but when it was in the zero position, it really didn't apply kind of any pressure on it. So when you were in that zero position and you hit a pothole, it would ramp up how much you would get as it moved, but right in the center, it would still be a little bit loose there, so you would still kind of feel just a little bit. This one, the dampeners go off each way, so it's got forces pushing in both directions at all times, keeping it at that center position. So it should remain tight throughout the entirety of its travel and not get less pressure as it gets towards the middle to almost no pressure. So this is should really tighten up our steering and provide us with a much more stable experience, so we're not having to white knuckle ourselves on that steering wheel trying to hold it tight, making sure we stay straight. This is going to help to reduce the fatigue that you have when driving down the road, because you're not going to be doing all the work. You're going to have the stabilizer here to help assist you. These stabilizers also offer some neat features when installed on other vehicles. There's some vehicles out there that get a shimmy in the steering wheel at certain speeds, and this can actually help to reduce or potentially completely eliminate that on some of those trucks and Jeeps out there that get a wobble occurring on them. Also, if you install these onto some of your flat tow vehicles that you're towing behind your motorhome, you can have limited backup maneuverability, whereas before you really should never back up when flat towing your vehicle, because the steering wheel can turn on your vehicle when you're backing up, and if you try to correct it like you would a normal trailer, the wheels could still be in a turn state and you can jackknife it really easily. With this type of stabilizer here, it helps to keep those wheels in a more typical line that a trailer would be when backing up, so you do get that limited ability to back it up some. So that's pretty neat. That's something that just wasn't out there before. So it's a whole new feature that's going to be available for some vehicles. And another thing that's kind of neat about the newer ones, with the older reflex style, especially on these Class A motorhomes when you were installing them, the way you would adjust it, if you didn't get it perfectly in center, you would have to loosen up the hardware and maneuver this into a new spot and then tighten it back down and hope that it stays in exactly where you were putting it in that straight center position. With the new ones here, there's actually jam nuts located on each side of our stabilizer, so that way we can adjust it as necessary right here to slightly increase or decrease the pressure to get it to where it's perfectly in center. So it's just a little bit more fine tuning that you can get in this one to ensure that you're going to be going straight down the road with the help of your stabilizer here. Now, even though it doesn't have the hex here, you can still turn it by hand. It just takes a little bit more effort to turn it, but it's still really nice that it has those fine-tune adjustments available to it on each side. So here we have our Exact Center here, and these do come in a few different versions depending on what you're planning on installing it on. We're going to be putting it on a Class A motorhome here, and there are two different versions for the Class A motorhomes. There is if it's a gross vehicle weight rating above 22,000 pounds or if it's below. We're going to be putting the bigger version on, so the above 22,000 pounds for this particular motorhome here. Now, these do come in a bunch of different kits as well that will come with the appropriate mounting hardware, but you'll have to make sure you get the appropriate fit kit that will give you the custom brackets you'll need to install it. But we wanted to take a look at it before we installed it on there, and compared to the reflex stabilizer, it feels like it's a little bit lighter than the reflex one. It doesn't have that big coil spring on it like that one had. And I was just curious to see how stiff it was going to be, if I could collapse it at all. And it is definitely got some power behind it. Neither side I can collapse by pushing down on it. I mean, I can almost support all my entire weight on it. So this is a very, very sturdy stabilizer. So I'm expecting to really stiffen up the steering and make it feel a lot more like a modern vehicle rather than the older motorhome that we've got here. So this should make some pretty drastic changes with how it feels. So we're hoping that it's not going to inhibit the steering in any way and make it feel like it's stiffer than it should. Hopefully it's still going to be nice and smooth and easy to operate. Once we get back out on the test course though, we'll know for sure. The center section here where the portions would move in and out is completely covered by this rubber boot to protect it from any kind of dirt, moisture, and stuff that could get in there and potentially cause corrosion or damage the seals. So it looks like a nice solid product. We can look here on each end and see that it's adjustable, so that's also a little bit different than the reflex stabilizer that Roadmaster was offering. This one's got adjustments on either end, whereas the reflex you would really just adjust it at the brackets where it would attach. So it seems like we're going to be able to fine tune this and get it perfectly straight on our steering a little bit more easily than with the other one. Now we've taken a little bit look at this, let's go ahead and get underneath and get it installed. Now before we roll under there, one of the things you'll want to make sure you do is pull your motorhome in a nice flat level area where you got to work, and make sure your steering wheel is perfectly straight, where your wheels are going to be straight in a nice straight line, because once we install this piece, we're going to be putting it kind of at this resting position here, and if our wheels are straight, then everything's going to be straight. But if our wheel is slightly crooked to the left or to the right, our stabilizer is going to want to hold it in that position. That's where the stabilizer thinks center is, so it's always going to try to return it to there, and you'll get a little bit of a pull then. Get your wheels nice and straight, and then you're ready to head under and get going. All right, so we're under here now. Your stabilizer is going to install between your steering mechanism. So this is our tie rod or drag link right here. This is going to connect it from each side. This is on our Class A motorhomes. Now, if you were doing this on a truck or a Jeep or like a Class C, a smaller motorhome, you're going to still install it between your steering mechanism and a point on the axle frame to make it secure. But for this one here, you want to make sure you're getting the correct fit kit for your particular motorhome. There are a lot of different fit kits out there, and that's going to be the bracketry that's going to make our stabilizer attached to our vehicle. So we're using the one that's for our Class A motorhome here that we've got, the F-53 chassis. When installing these, sometimes it'll have you attach it to your U-bolt, and one of the things you want to check is to make sure that you're going to have a long enough U-bolt to be able to attach this to. So you can see the thickness of our plate here. We're going to slide it under here to make sure that we've got some threads sticking out below, to make sure that we do have a long enough U-bolt. Now I would recommend replacing the U-bolt even if you do have a long enough thread, just because that'll ensure that you're going to have proper clamping and no issues. We do have enough threads though, and our customer doesn't want to replace it, so we're just going to take the nuts off and make sure that we already just checked there to make sure it's going to fit. So now we'll go ahead and remove the nuts off of our U-bolt here. Now there are going to be a very high torque on these Class A motorhomes, so make sure you've got big equipment to be able to do this, and you're going to need a torque wrench that can torque above 250 pounds. So you may have to rent one in that situation, because that's higher than your typical half-inch torque wrench would go to. You can grab a breaker bar, and that's probably what I'd recommend to start with a breaker bar to crack them loose, and then once you got them a little bit looser, you can switch over to a ratchet. And then I use an extension with a socket on it, and that makes my ratchet quite a bit longer to make things a little bit easier here, to help us not have to work quite so hard on getting these removed. For this particular motorhome with the F-53 chassis on our Class A here, we're going to have a 1 1/8 inch socket that we're going to use to remove these. And again, it's going to be tight. If you've got the ability to lift it and get an impact under there, I would recommend that, but you can do it here on the ground just like we're doing. After we go so far on the one, we are going to go over to the other side and get this side loosened up as well, kind of working back and forth so one side doesn't get overly stressed. And just keep working them off of there until they're all the way off. So we got them worked down there. Took a little bit doing it by hand. You do want to be careful if you get it all the way down here and then it starts to spin with your ratchet, like it's not, when you go one direction, it's no longer clicking, it just spins. These are probably going to be a little bit hot from the force of unscrewing them, so you might want to wear some gloves or just kind of spray it with some rust penetrant and let it cool for a minute. But once you get them pretty much towards the bottom there, you should be able to just take them off by hand there. But yeah, just be careful. They may or may not be hot from the friction. Save your U-bolt or your nuts and your washers, unless you're replacing the hardware. You're going to be reusing it. We'll now take our bracket, and you want to install it in the orientation it indicates in the instructions for our motorhome we're working on here today. We're going to use these two holes here, the slotted and the larger hole. And you want the small hole here to be pointed towards the middle of your motorhome and also towards the rear. So it's going to slide up just like that. So slide that up in place there. Then grab your nut and washer and thread it right back on there. And then we're going to be torquing these to the manufacturer's specification. And I do recommend replacement of the U-bolt. We do sell U-bolts here at eTrailer in varying thicknesses and length. So if you are taking these loose, you just want to make sure you're replacing it with the same diameter U-bolt and potentially slightly longer to accommodate for this new bracket. So we've got our nuts tightened back down to the point where it's up against the bottom here. So most of it's out of the way. We'll grab our torque wrench now and we'll tighten it down. But I did want to cover just a couple of things. When you go to tighten down your U-bolt, especially when you get to the end for torquing, you want to make sure you torque it evenly on each side. So you want to see about the same amount of threads poking out on each side. So I can see that the one here closer to the passenger side, I've got more threads than over here. So I'll start with this one first. And after I get this one a little bit longer with more threads coming down, if it hasn't clicked on my torque wrench, I'll switch to this one and alternate back and forth to try to get them as even as possible. Also, if you replaced your U-bolt or your U-bolt moved when you took it loose, make sure it is sitting in its seat up here. There will be a little groove up on top that the U-bolt sits in, so just make sure that it is in that groove. All right, now we've got our big torque wrench on there so we can reach the spec from the manufacturer, and we'll just get it torqued on down. And again, just remember you want to go back and forth, working your way to make sure you get it as tightened as evenly as possible. Once you've got that all torqued down over there, then we can take our other piece of hardware where it's going to attach to our steering and get it in place. So this is the other piece that comes with your Class A motorhome hardware kit, if that's what you're installing it on. And with this particular one, you'll want the hole to be towards the front of the vehicle where the stabilizer will attach to. And these are where our U-bolts are going to drop down. This piece will sit on the bottom of our tie rod here. We're going to need to be able to slide it back and forth to make sure we get it all lined up properly. If you're installing your stabilizer onto like a truck or a Jeep, a lot of times the hardware has a pretty specific spot that it goes in, but with these bigger Class A's like this, you kind of got to determine the position yourself. So I am going to rotate it this way just to make it easier to install the hardware, but it does need to eventually be pointing downward when we get it fully tightened. So we'll go ahead and put our washer on there after sliding our U-bolt around the shaft. U-bolt goes through the bracket, then your washer, then your nylon locking nut. Get it on the other side as well here. And we have two U-bolts, so the other slots that you see here, those other slotted holes, are going to get our other U-bolt. So now we'll take this one, slide it around. Again, I'm just going to rotate it this way to make it easier to put the hardware on. Slide that on there. This one will go on here. So I am going to snug this down just a little bit just to help take up some of the play, but we don't want to tighten it to a point where we can't rotate it anymore. We're going to use a 9/16 socket for these pieces of hardware here on these U-bolts. And just like our other U-bolt, we want to try to get these even with roughly the same amount of threads poking out on each side. So that's going to be close enough. Just again, taking up some of the play. All right, maybe a little bit more. All right, and it can still rotate there. We can still slide it as we need to. So now we're going to get our stabilizer roughly installed into the position it's going to go. So we can go ahead and hook up this side real quick here. The stabilizer on this side of our bracket will sit on top. So we're going to take our bolt, we're going to go up through, we're going to place a washer. And I'm going to hold it up here so you guys can see more easily. So our bolt goes through, our washer goes on, our stabilizer then will slide into place over our bolt. We'll place our other washer and then our nut. Now we're going to head down to the other side where our other bracket is that we previously installed. So now on this side, our bolt's going to go the opposite direction. Bolt will go down through the hole. We'll then place our washer on it. We'll then place our stabilizer on the bolt, follow that up with another washer, and then the nylon locking nut. All right, and at this point now, this is where we got to make sure that when we get our hardware tightened down, that we get it in kind of a neutral position, so that way it's not affecting our steering. It's going to be kind of in just right in the center, and then that way our steering stabilizer here is always going to try to return our wheels to this center if we hit any holes or anything. It's going to help bring it back for us. And if we have it off to one direction, it's not actually going to be center. It's going to be putting your wheels off a little bit to the left or to the right. So this part here is kind of the fine tuning part. But again, we do have these adjustments on the ends there for fine tuning, and if we do get it just a little bit off, we'll be able to come back. You'll likely have to do a quick test drive to verify if you need to make any adjustments. So when we tighten down our hardware, I prefer to start with the bolt that's over here because this bracket doesn't move. Your adjustment on the other bracket there where it can install on the steering shaft there on the drag link or tie rod, that'll move to a certain spot, but this one's going to be static in this position. So we're going to use a 3/4 inch wrench and socket to snug this down. And that'll just kind of help lift up on the bar for you a little bit as well. We'll now come over here to the other side where we can also kind of snug this hardware down, but this one I usually don't snug all the way down just yet. We want it to be in this position where this is angled straight forward like that. So we're going to take up some of the bolt there. There we go. We still got just a little bit of play in it, so we're able to rotate it if we need to make sure we get our bracket all the way up. But we got a majority of the play out of it there, so you can still turn it, but it's for the most part gone as far as the slack. But I'm going to switch back to our 9/16 socket so we can get this installed and fully clamped down there. So we'll want to make sure we hold this up right here, and I'm going to hold it by the stabilizer and then snug these down. Working back and forth. All right, and we've got just a slight downward angle, so we might just loosen it. Actually, it looks actually really good, actually, because it's got this angle, but you want to pay attention to the front and the back, making sure it's angled forward. We want to try to keep our steering shaft straight, our steering stabilizer here, try to keep that as parallel as we can, and that looks pretty good. So we're just going to finish up snugging these down. And that looks good there, so we're going to switch back to our 3/4 size now to finish snugging that down, and then we can grab our torque wrench and finalize torquing our components. So the specifications outlined in your instructions. And you can see I'm alternating as I do that. And then we can finish snugging these down. With these, you really just want to make sure that it's snug and that you're not collapsing the rubber to where it's sticking out past the outside. So we don't want to crush the rubber to a point where it's bulging out past like our washers and the actual shock attachment point there. All right, we're almost done. At this point now, We want to snug up our jam nuts that are located here on each end of the Exact Center. You're going to need a 7/8 wrench to hold the stabilizer, and you're also going to need a 13/16 for the jam nut, because we don't want to turn the end. The end actually unthreads from there to adjust for the length ever so slightly. So if we were to turn this, it would be more or less than what we're at. So we're going to just put our wrench on there, make sure we're holding it. And then I'm just going to snug it up by hand first and just verify it can't move, and just snug down that jam nut. And you also maybe want to hold the shaft there while you're snugging it down. So now we're going to do the same thing over here on this side, and when you're tightening the jam nut, you do want to tighten it towards the end. You don't want to tighten it into the shaft there. Grab our 7/8 to hold and then snug it down. All right, once you've got your jam nuts secure, at this point you'll want to take it for a test drive, verify that it's driving straight. If it's pulling in one direction, you can make fine-tune adjustments here by loosening the jam nut and spinning the end. You actually just grab the shaft here and spin it, and it will thread either closer or further away from the end because it threads into this piece. You also could take these loose, but this is kind of the old style way of adjusting for like the reflex. The previous model of stabilizer that Roadmaster had, you would loosen these and move them, but these are going to give you a little bit more fine-tune adjustment to really get it dialed in perfectly. So we're back underneath. We're going to make some minor adjustments. It had a slight push towards the driver's side, towards our left. So we're going to use our jam nuts here to position it closer to this direction. So we're just going to loosen up our jam nuts there. There we go. We'll get that loose. And now if we were to spin it with the top over this way, that is going to decrease the distance between this bar and the attachment. So we're making this side a little shorter, and then the other side we can make just a little bit longer. And then we'll just reinstall our jam nut. And sometimes you don't need to tweak both sides. It just kind of depends on how much adjustment you're going to need to make, on how far you'll need to move it. All right, so we made our minor adjustments here. We're back in our straightaway section. And boy, does it turn right back to center for us nice. And we're just driving straight now, and wheel is perfectly straight, motorhome's going perfectly straight. So we've got our adjustment exactly where we need it here. So things are looking really good here with this setup. So at that point, our installation's complete. Everything is adjusted the way we need it to be adjusted. And that completes our installation of Roadmaster's Exact Center steering stabilizer on our 2004 Ford F-53 chassis motorhome.